What is going on YouTube? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be ranking every dynasty in NBA history. So you're probably wondering what counts as a dynasty. Well, to me a dynasty is any team in NBA history that won at least 3 championships with the same core group of players. So that core could be 3+ all-star caliber players or 2 superstar caliber players. For the sake of this video, I'm not including teams like the late 80s Detroit Pistons or the early 2010s Miami Heat with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. Although those teams did go to 3+ finals, I think the mark of a true dynasty is 3 championships, and those teams only repeated, so for that reason I'm not putting them on this list. As for what I'm going to be looking for in this video, I'm going to be looking for which teams had the biggest impact on the league and the culture of the NBA, individual and team accolades, and then just overall dominance as a dynasty. So with all of this criteria coming into effect, I think I've determined there's about 8 dynasties in NBA history. So starting off the list at number 8, we have the 1949 to 1954 Minneapolis Lakers. As a lot of you guys know, the Lakers started in Minneapolis. This was in the Basketball Association of America before they merged with the NBL to become the NBA later on. The league only had 16 teams in 1949, with 4 teams in the Western Division and 4 teams in the Eastern Division for the playoffs, with only 3 rounds to the title. The series were usually best of 3 until the finals, which were best of 7, and then eventually they added best of 5 for the second round when more teams got added to the NBA. This team had a winning percentage of 68%, winning 273 games in a 5-year span, and they were led by Hall of Famers Vern Mickelson, George Mikan, and Slater Martin, to name a few. The Lakers had multiple Hall of Famers on this team, including the big-name legend at the time, George Mikan. Mikan was a 3-time scoring champ, 4-time All-Star. He won MVP in the previous NBL before the NBA was formed, and he made 6 All-NBA teams between the BAA and the NBA before and after they got merged. Mikan led his Lakers to 5 finals in 6 years, where they ended up three-peating as well. I know the league just didn't have the same amount of talent it does now, but it was still impressive that they dominated their opponents. The reason this team is ranked so low is mainly because their talent overall refinement of the league was really low at the time. Guys basically made the Hall of Fame for winning titles, but it was also a lot easier to become a champion if your team was a lot better than the opponent. I know they did win 5 in 6 years, but it's kind of just not as impressive as some of the other dynasties on this list. The Minneapolis Lakers do get credit for setting the stage for the Lakers being a winning organization and being the earliest standard of winning in the NBA, but it was so early in NBA history that I had to rank it at the bottom of this list. This Lakers team was really solid for the time, but I think just considering what the league was like at the time, they did set the stage for the NBA and what greatness looked like in the NBA, but overall I just have to put them at the bottom of this list because these other teams, although they may not have won as many titles, they did play in a league that was much more refined and just much more developed as an NBA league overall. So for that reason, I'm putting the Minneapolis Lakers at 8th on this list. At number 7, we have Kobe and Shaq's Lakers from 2000 to 2004. Now, before you dislike this video, just hear me out for a second. Kobe and Shaq joined the Lakers in 1996, and it did take them a couple of years to get the ball rolling. Kobe was super young when he joined up with Shaq, and it took them a few years to really get it going. They were a good young team in the late 90s, but they did end up getting swept their last 2 years in the 90s. Eventually they got over the hump in 2000, where they won the finals, beating the Indiana Pacers in 6 games. As for overall dominance, the Lakers won 287 regular season games and 64 playoff games in this span, and they had a 70% win percentage between the playoffs and the regular season. They're also the last team in NBA history to three-peat, and they hold one of the greatest playoff runs in NBA history, going 15-1. They wound up going to the finals 4 times in 5 years, and the only year they missed it was mainly due to Shaq having nagging injuries, the team having a few chemistry issues, and the fatigue of going to the finals 3 years in a row. Taking a look at individual and team accolades, they obviously won 3 championships in 5 years, and they went to 4 finals in that span as well. Shaq won MVP, 3 straight finals MVPs, 5 straight All-NBA first teams, and 3 All-Defensive teams in that span, while Kobe made 5 All-Star teams, 5 All-NBA teams, All-Star Game MVP, and All-Defense. As for overall impact on the league, I think this Lakers squad changed the culture of the NBA. I think in the early 2000s, with the Bulls kind of dying down, the NBA needed that next team up and marketable at the time. And I think with Phil Jackson going there, I think the Lakers really, and Kobe Bryant being such a big star in the league, especially a young star, I think the attention was just on LA and on the Lakers. And it really just helped set the culture of the Lakers being a winning organization again. Not that they were bad in the 90s, but I think winning more championships always does good for the Lakers. And I think at the time, it just really helped them get to that rarefied status. And I think they set the culture in place at the time. And a lot of stars were drawn to the Lakers at the time. Pop culture was focused on the Lakers. Everyone was wearing Lakers jerseys. Basketball jerseys were huge at the time. And I think all of that was really because of the Lakers. They were winning, and a lot of attention being on LA makes basketball more and more popular. Basketball wasn't just a spectator sport at the time, and it was becoming a sport that everyone was into, everyone was drawn to, everyone was looking at. So for that reason, I think the Lakers did have a huge impact not on just the NBA, but the overall culture and pop culture at the time in the early 2000s. I know that doesn't have too much to do with basketball, but I think that is just a huge factor that's played when you're looking at dynasties, especially their impact on the league as a whole. So with that being said, I have the Los Angeles Lakers with Kobe and Shaq at number 7. I think if they stayed together, they would have won a lot more championships. And I think if Shaq took things a little bit more seriously, I think they definitely could have been running for a long time as a dynasty. They probably could have won 5 or 6, maybe even more than that. I don't know. We'll never know, but unfortunately, I'm putting them this low mainly because I feel like they didn't reach their pinnacle as a dynasty and they could have done so much more if they stayed together. At number 6, we have Larry Bird's Celtics from 1981 to 1988. Before the Celtics got Larry Bird, they were only a 29-win team, but after they got him, 61 wins. They were basically contenders every year Larry Bird was on the team, and from his rookie year to his final year, the Celtics also had multiple Hall of Famers on their team as well. I mean, the year they swept Michael Jordan and the Bulls, they had 5 Hall of Famers on their team with Bird, Parrish, McHale, Johnson, and Walton. They went to 5 finals in the 80s and won 3 of them, and they also made the conference finals 9 straight years. Larry Bird was top 2 in MVP voting 9 years in a row, winning 3 in a row from 84 to 86. Taking a look at individual and team accolades, I think this Celtics team is really underrated for how stacked they were. A lot of people give the Warriors hate for being ridiculously stacked, but the Celtics team was arguably just as stacked. Just not everyone was really at their prime, but nevertheless, they had 5 Hall of Famers one year. They had 2 MVPs in 86. Granted, Walton was not in his prime, but nevertheless, they still had 2 MVPs. Taking a look at overall dominance on the league, the Celtics team won 489 games in this 8-year span, and they had a 75% win percentage in this time span as well. And they also had one of the greatest single-season teams of all time in 1986 that won 67 games, and they only lost 1 home game that entire season, including the playoffs. The Celtics did face some juggernauts in the 80s, like the early 80s 76ers, the Isaiah Thomas Pistons, the Rockets with Moses Malone, the Rockets with Sampson and Olajuwon, and of course, the Showtime Lakers, just to name a few. I think a lot of people don't really credit this Celtics team that much because there was a bigger dynasty at the time in the Lakers, but this Celtics team was really good and really dominant. I mean, they dominated the East pretty much the entire decade, even though they didn't go to every single finals. But nevertheless, the Celtics team did help save the NBA along with the Lakers. So as for the impact on the league, this team had one of the largest impacts in league history. I only put them this low mainly because there was a bigger dynasty at the time in the Lakers, and the Lakers did end up winning more titles in that span, and they went to more finals. So I know that's kind of hurting the Celtics in this regard, but I think if the Showtime Lakers didn't exist, I think obviously the Celtics would have won way more titles, so it kind of just hurts them in that regard. But nevertheless, this team was still really good, and it could probably have any spot on this list, but I think 6th was the best spot considering everything else, and the other teams on this list as well. At number 5, we have the San Antonio Spurs. So we all know that the Spurs didn't really tank, but kind of tanked when David Robinson got hurt, and ended up getting Tim Duncan, which changed their whole organization around. With that being said, I'm going to take a look at the big 3 with Manu, Tony, and Tim. So I'm not really going to look at their first championship. I'm kind of only going to look at from 2003 onwards. That's when that trio really won all their titles. So, as you all know, the Spurs won 50 plus games in every season they played together with this core, and, well, excluding the lockout year, but regardless of that, they won 50 games with their core, and they went to 5 finals in this span as well, winning 4 of them and losing 1 in heartbreaking fashion against the Miami Heat. I think when we're taking a look at impact on the league, the Spurs are just the mark of class and just how you want to run your organization. They did what they had to do, never flashy, never in your face, just played basketball, won championships, dominated their opponents, and got the job done. They only lost 1 title, so I mean, when you take a look at this team overall, I think they were just really dominant. A lot of people don't give them credit for not going back to back or not three-peating, and some people even say they're not a dynasty for it. But I think with my criteria of a dynasty, they are obviously a dynasty because that core did win multiple titles together. They won 4 titles together, so when you take a look at that, I think for impact on the league, the Spurs did just show the league what it takes to be a winner and what it takes to just worry about nothing else but just basketball and just winning. When you look at individual and team accolades, I mean, this is like 12 years worth of teams, so I'm kind of just looking at their core. I think we all know Tim Duncan's achievements. I really can't even list all of them because there's so many, but they had 3+ Hall of Famers on their team at that one point. I mean, they did have some notable role players like Robert Horry, Steve Kerr, Bruce Bowen, to name a few, and obviously Kawhi Leonard was on that team as well. He wasn't a Hall of Famer yet, but he was still a huge contributor in the last year they won a championship. So for individual and team accolades, especially team accolades, they obviously did win 4 championships with this group, and they went to 5 finals. This Spurs trio has the most wins in NBA history by a trio, and I think they're right up there with the great dynasties, especially trios in NBA history. And when we take a look at dominance as a dynasty, I think you have to give all the credit to Coach Pop for taking not a lot and making them into stars and great role players. I mean, a lot of these guys weren't really expected to be really great except for probably Tim Duncan, and he turned Kawhi Leonard into a superstar, turned Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili into Hall of Famers, especially late first rounders, late second round picks. And then you had a lot of serviceable role players like Steve Kerr, Robert Horry, Bruce Bowen, Boris Diaw, just to name a few. So I think a lot of people don't give the Spurs the credit they deserve because they didn't repeat or three-peat, but they were dominant just like every other team, and they did it for a lot longer, which honestly, if the other teams didn't peak as high as they did on this list, the Spurs would probably be higher. But I think the Spurs took a little while to win 4 titles in this span, and a lot of teams did the same amount of winning, well, not the same amount of winning, but they won the same amount of titles in a much shorter time span. So for that reason, I put the Spurs at 5th. I think if they did everything in a shorter time span or just were significantly more dominant than every other team, I mean, the Lakers did win 5 titles in this time span as well. So I mean, the Spurs did dominate, but I think if they did it in a shorter time span, it would have made them even greater than they were. Nevertheless, the Spurs are one of the greatest teams ever, and I put them at number 5 on this list. At number 4, we have the Golden State Warriors from 2015 to 2019. Now, I only put the Warriors above the Spurs mainly because the Warriors broke a bunch of records, had a bunch of accolades in terms of individual and team accolades, and I think they changed the league more than the Spurs did. And I think that starts with the dominance of Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, and a little bit of Draymond Green as well. But in terms of impact on the league, I think the Warriors are right up there with the Bulls. I mean, before the Warriors, teams weren't taking as many threes. I know D'Antoni started the three-point revolution with the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns, but I think Steph Curry and Klay Thompson shooting so many threes really pushed the league in that way, and it pushed them in the direction of shooting so many threes that teams are taking like 40, 50 threes a game now. And in the 90s, that was considered like nobody would ever do that in the 90s. And now guys are making 13, 14 threes like it's nothing. So I think on overall impact on the league, the Warriors really did change the game, mainly Steph Curry. Before, it wasn't a small ball focused offense. I think offenses didn't focus so much on three-point shooting, and now everybody wants to take threes. Guys are getting drafted if they can take threes and make threes, especially bigs. And I think overall, the Warriors did have a huge impact on the league. And then when we take a look at the individual and team accolades, I think I don't really have to go through all of these because you guys already know they're pretty recent. The Warriors were really, really stacked. Might be the most stacked team, especially with Kevin Durant, in NBA history. You had 2 MVPs, a Defensive Player of the Year, and one of the greatest shooters of all time in Klay Thompson. Then you had Andre Iguodala, and you had guys like Sean Livingston, David West, Andrew Bogut, all those role players who were really solid for the Warriors over their last 5 seasons. I think just looking at individual and team accolades, like the records Klay broke, Steph broke, all that stuff manifests for them being arguably, if you want to talk about single season teams, I think the Warriors, especially 2017 Warriors, are right up there with the 96 Bulls and the 2001 Lakers as greatest teams of all time. And I think a lot of people don't give them credit, as much credit as they should, for the 73 win team because they lost the finals. That team was one or two shots away from possibly being the greatest team of all time. And I know the Cavs still ended up winning, but nevertheless, that team was really good and they're a bit underrated. But I mean, taking a look at all of their achievements, the Warriors won 399 games in this time span, which is good enough for 78% win percentage. They have the best regular season record ever, the best playoff run at record ever in terms of winning percentage. And then they have a bunch of individual records like Klay Thompson 37 and a quarter, Klay's 14 threes, Steph's records, most threes in the season. All of that manifests to them being just one of the most remarkable teams in NBA history. The only reason they're not higher on this list is because it didn't last long enough. Now, I know their run isn't done yet, but I don't think the version of the Warriors we saw the last 5 years is going to be replicated, especially because their players are older now, they have nagging injuries, they've been to the finals 5 years straight. I just don't think they're going to hit those peaks again, but nevertheless, they were a really great team at their peak, and if Kevin Durant stayed and everyone stayed healthy and they three-peated last year, I think they could have honestly been up there with the 96 Bulls and I guess just the 90s Bulls in general. But we don't know because Kevin Durant got hurt, Klay Thompson got hurt, then he left, and we're never going to see what that team would have done later on. So for that reason, although the Warriors are really great, they just aren't the greatest dynasty. I think they did have one of the greatest peak seasons ever, but when you look at a dynasty, it has to be longer than that to be the best dynasty ever. So for that reason, I'm putting the Golden State Warriors at number 4. At number 3, we have the Showtime Lakers from 1980 to 1991. The Showtime Lakers changed the basketball and sports entertainment industry forever during the 80s. Before the Lakers, we didn't really have anything like cheerleaders or halftime shows in basketball games, but once the Lakers happened and then Showtime happened, we started seeing celebrities at games more. We had cheerleaders, halftime shows, all of that spectacle and entertainment that was added onto basketball really changed the NBA and changed basketball as we know it. The Lakers had a 73% winning percentage in this time span with over 700 wins. At the time, the Lakers had a total of 6 Hall of Famers in total on their finals teams across the 11 seasons and the 9 times they made the finals. Magic and the Lakers went to 9 finals in 12 seasons, and the other 3 years they were really competitive for the most part. As for impact, Magic led the Lakers into the true status of winning culture and winning organization that the Lakers didn't really have before, with the Celtics dominating them so much. With Magic's group, it really said that the Lakers are a winning organization and a championship organization, and they showed that with their dominance of going to 9 finals and winning 5 of them in this time span. As for individual and team accolades, Magic Johnson won 3 MVPs with 12 All-NBA appearances and 10 All-NBA spots. Kareem won Finals MVP on the Lakers and 5 titles there with 11 All-Star appearances in that time span as well. And then there was also James Worthy, who won a Finals MVP, made 2 All-NBA teams, and 7 All-Star appearances. As for dominance, this Lakers team was truly dominant, and they showed it this whole decade, going to the finals as much time as they did, still being competitive. In terms of dominance, they truly dominated their era. They likely would have three-peated with Magic and Scott being healthy in the 1988 finals, but that didn't happen, so they didn't get that rarefied three-peat that a lot of teams have gotten. But nevertheless, they were still super dominant in this era. Unfortunately, they didn't three-peat, but they probably would have if Byron Scott and Magic Johnson were healthy in the 1988 NBA Finals. But nevertheless, they still really dominated their opponents. The only reason I don't have them higher on this list is because of how good Michael Jordan and his Bulls were and how good Bill Russell's Celtics were in the 60s. It's unfortunate that Magic Johnson got HIV and Kareem got old and the rest of the team slowly went elsewhere, because they could have still competed in the 90s if Magic was still healthy. I mean, he was only 31 when he retired. They probably still had a few good years left in him. Nevertheless, it is what it is. they still dominated at the time, and they could have done even more. At number 2, we have Michael Jordan's Bulls from 1991 to 1998. The Bulls had the greatest impact on the league as a whole, largely due to Michael Jordan and his greatness. I don't think any team is going to touch the impact the Bulls had on the league as a whole. They made the game a global game, and Michael Jordan was one of the biggest stars in the world at the time, which not a lot of NBA players have really reached the status Michael Jordan reached. And I think overall, as a dynasty, the Bulls just showed everyone what pure dominance looked like. People feared the Bulls, their opponents feared the Bulls, guys didn't even believe they could beat them. Every time you doubted Michael Jordan, he came back and won, and I think that just showed how great this Bulls team really was. Michael Jordan turned this entire organization around and made the Bulls into one of the top 4 best teams in NBA history as an organization. And during his time with the Bulls, they never lost more than 3 games in a row from 1990 to 1998. The superstardom with the Bulls is something I don't think will ever be eclipsed in NBA history. I don't think anyone's going to touch how popular that Bulls team was. Social media has just made players too accessible, and we can just see their everyday lives too frequently. But back then, seeing a glimpse of Michael Jordan was like seeing something you'd never seen before. You were never going to get that opportunity again. But now you can see what LeBron's having for breakfast. Like, I don't know, that's just something that the 90s is just going to always have that we just won't have today. That status, that feeling of this godlike status from the Bulls, that's something we just never going to see again. As for individual and team accolades, Michael Jordan is the most decorated player in NBA history, and there's just way too many awards to list, even with his teammates as well, like Pippen, Rodman, Kerr. These guys have a bunch of championships. They went 72-10, they won 490 games in this time span in the regular season, and they just straight up dominated their opponents, and they probably, I don't know, I don't personally think they would have 8-peated if Jordan played 94 or 95. I think the Rockets would have beat them or someone else would have beat them, but nevertheless, the Bulls still straight up dominated this entire decade for the most part. The only reason I don't have them higher on this list is because the Celtics straight up dominated for 10 years plus, and although their competition probably wasn't as good as Michael Jordan and the Bulls, they deserve the credit for dominating whoever they played against. So for that very reason, I'm putting Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls from the 90s at the second best dynasty in NBA history. At number 1, we have Bill Russell's Celtics from 1957 to 1969. This Celtics team won 716 regular season games in this time span. Taking a look at their dominance as a dynasty, I think it's pretty clear that they're the most dominant dynasty in NBA history. A lot of people give them flack for playing against plumbers and milkmen, so to speak, but I think when you take a look at all the teams that played in that era, they were just better than everyone, so you can't knock them for just beating everyone. And I know they were really stacked. I mean, in 1963, they had 9 Hall of Famers, but a lot of those Hall of Famers only made the Hall of Fame because they won so many championships. Regardless, this Celtics team was still really, really good, and I know the NBA only had around 8 or 9 teams at the time, but dominating your opponent, regardless of the size of teams, should still be noted when taking a look at the most dominant dynasties in NBA history, and they did it 11 times. That's almost twice as many championships as the Bulls, and I know they didn't play as many rounds in the playoffs. The teams weren't as good, but I mean, the Celtics probably had plumbers and milkmen too on their teams, but people don't really look at that. They look at Bill Russell and they look at the other Hall of Famers and say they're more stacked than everyone else. But some of their opponents had Hall of Famers too, like the Lakers at the time as well. So I'm not going to knock them for beating their competition, because at the end of the day, you have to play who's in front of you, and it's not their fault that they're playing in the time where the NBA is still kind of new. As for individual and team accolades, I think all you guys really know about the big hitters like Bob Cousy, Bill Russell, and John Havlicek. These Celtics teams were so stacked. Everyone was pretty much in the Hall of Fame that played for these Celtics, and there's just too many achievements to list. Regardless, Bill Russell won the most. Bob Cousy won a lot. He won 6. Havlicek won 8. Like, a lot of these guys have 10 championships, 8 championships, 9 championships. They just won a lot, and they were just better than everyone else. In terms of the impact on the league, I think they just showed what winning looks like and just dominance. I don't know, I'm not really too well versed with other sports, but I know this Celtics team probably is up there with the most championships by a group, and in any of the major American pro sports probably. So I think for overall dominance, you just gotta tip your hat to this Celtics team. They won almost twice as many championships as the Bulls, and I know it was at a time with not as great teams. Nevertheless, they still dominated, and for that reason, I'm putting Bill Russell's Boston Celtics at number 1 on this list. That was a lot to get through. That's my ranking of every dynasty in NBA history. I don't know who actually got this far in this video. If you did, I appreciate you. Drop a crown emoji in the comments if you got this far. That's all for this one. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.
Just in case the party gets rowdy, I brought my crew. I don't mind if y'all wanna fight me, just don't shoot. I see you got on all this